So my name's David Nalley, and I will try and stay out of the way of the screen. My contact information's there. I'm also here for the entire conference, so if you find something that you vehemently disagree with me about, or I piss you off in this talk, feel free to vent your anger at me, or do it via email or Twitter. So I'm really going to be talking about infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, and I'm going to be focusing on doing that as largely private cloud, although there's a lot of applicability to the public cloud as well. I used to ask people who were using the cloud within in audiences that I talked to. I think that has changed, particularly at a place like PuppetConf, where you guys are simply by showing up or self-selecting yourselves as being on the cutting edge and leading things. So anyone here not using the cloud at all?
It depends on how you define cloud.
Yeah, so we'll deal with that. Anyone in here not using or haven't ever used AWS?
No.
Okay. Those of you who are not using AWS, are you using some other public cloud? Or are you just doing things internally? Okay. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a recovering sysadmin, which is the nice term that I'm forced to use for saying that I'm a curmudgeonly BOFH who no longer has to be on call. I have a history of a love-hate history with cloud computing, and wow, I am a creator of ugly slides, and apparently I'm in the way of my own slides. You don't really want to see them anyway. This background is a stock background that looks prettier than white, but that's about it. So you'll see a lot of stuff I've taken off the net to try and cover up my ugly slides. But I have this love-hate relationship with cloud computing. I really hate the term cloud. I hate the fact that it's become so hyped and everybody wants to do it. A few years back, I ran a conference in the Southeast called the Southeast Linux Fest, and one of the rules I had for talk submissions was if you're going to submit a talk, it should not have cloud anywhere in the title or the description, or that's automatic rejected talk.
Yes.
I then find myself, within about 8 or 9 months, I went to go work for cloud.com, and I found myself having a cloud.com email address, which I found ironic. I do think the technology is fascinating. I hate a lot of the culture that has arisen around it. So anyway, lest you think that I have a bipolar disorder, I do think that cloud computing is awesome. I think that it's a tremendous enabler, and I think if you look at what cloud computing can do for the business side of things, that it's incredible in its place. In general, it's an awesome tool. The problem is that it's been so awesome, and the efficiencies achieved have been so incredible and have been so beneficial for companies that everybody wants a cloud, and everybody also wants to sell you a cloud, even if being a cloud merely means that they have a sticker. This is an ad that you see if you leave the Delta terminal at SFO. And I have no idea how you have enterprise Wi-Fi that is cloud managed, but apparently that is a product that you can buy, and they are happy to sell you. That all of this hype has really destroyed a lot of the focus that people have, and I think is creating a disdain for cloud computing. And if I didn't warn you strongly enough, I am incredibly negative and pessimistic a good chunk of the time. A lot of that comes from me being, the person on call who PagerDuty was announcing fun things to, so I automatically see all the bad things that could possibly happen. So someone did mention earlier, let's talk about how we define cloud. And so this is my disambiguation page, and it's really why I said cloud is awesome. because Dave Nielsen came up with this definition of on-demand, self-service, scalable, and measurable. I think I'm going to actually stand right here because that's a little more out of the way. And that awesome definition is a pretty good, quick definition. I think there are some unwritten rules as well. So when we talk about cloud, it's not just that it's on-demand, self-service, scalable, and measurable. It's that you're also doing that with commodity. So your hypervisor's a commodity. The machines that it runs on are commodity. The network had better be commodity because you simply can't scale if it's not commodity. If every time you reach the next plateau, you have to invest hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars just to push yourself over the edge, there are some problems. So user empowerment, I think, is also a key feature. If you're creating a cloud and the only consumer of that are the people who already have root access to your hypervisors and root access to all of your network equipment, I question whether you're doing cloud computing. You may be doing really nice, fast, automated provisioning, but I don't know if you're actually doing cloud computing. People not knowing what cloud computing is actually causes a lot of problems. And so I get to go around and participate in delivering training all over the US and occasionally to Europe. And I occasionally have people who will come up to me and say, hey, help me out here because my boss has told me we're going to have a cloud and I need you to define a strategy for me. Sorry. And they don't know why they want a cloud. They have no idea what benefit it's going to bring them. Someone read about it and thinks that that's going to be the next best thing. The one that I like the best, a gigantic multinational defense contractor came up to me in LA about a year and a half ago and said, we're going to have to resell this cloud thing, but we don't really know what we need to sell. Can you help formulate a strategy for us so that, you know, when we go back to the federal government, we can sell cloud computing services to them? And you know, they know they want to sell it even, not just that they want it, but they want to sell it because other people want it from them and they have no clue what they should be selling. And I think that this goes a step further. Yes, you can do lots of awesome things, but you really need to have a reason why. I say that it's why do you want to innovate. I don't think a lot of people know that this is an innovation. I think they think it's the next technology. And I think that if you want to do cloud computing and you don't already know why you want to do cloud computing, there are some substantial problems. There are only a few reasons why anyone wants to do anything in IT to begin with. Increase reliability, make things more efficient, maybe increase security. That may be making things more reliable. You don't go do things, you certainly don't invest tons of money in people's time just because, or you shouldn't. If that is the norm, perhaps that's a sign you need to be starting to scope out other job opportunities. But most of the people who start down this cloud path, quite honestly, they can't answer the why question. And so I'm curious, the people who are in here who are looking at doing cloud computing, how many of you, and I promise I'll protect your anonymity, it's dark in here, most people can't see your face, how many of you can answer the why question? Anyone in here been directed to go do cloud computing without knowing why you were doing it? So I see a couple of folks. Honestly, I think that it's probably far larger than that. But just based on the conversations that I see people having. So I also think that it's not just important to ask why you want to innovate, but look at what people are claiming from a sales perspective. Ironically, CloudWatch is a real product. This guy is selling a real product too, and despite what looks like a completely trolled message, that is a real ad. This is the kind of thing, though, that folks are like, oh wow, we can drive incredible efficiencies. Do you really have that problem in the first place? Is your problem that you cannot provision fast enough? That you need to be able to innovate faster? Maybe it is. If you don't ever provision a single machine for months at a time, everything is completely stable, maybe cloud computing is not a solution for you. One of the things that I hear back on, because I'm not at all on the sales or customer side of things, I'm solely on the open source side of things, is I hear the reports back from qualification conversations, where folks at my employer are going out and saying, hey, are you really ready to deploy cloud computing? Let's get the prerequisites out of the way. And so some of those prerequisites are things like, do you have logging set up? Some centralized syslog or logging service. That's something that you kind of need at a minimum when you're talking about machines that you may spin up and spin down and never see again. It shocks me how many of these folks don't have automated provisioning in place. They don't have configuration management. They don't have decent monitoring or logging. It really shocks me how many of these folks haven't even looked at virtualization yet. And so if I were going to tell you the prerequisites, it's not, oh, I need to have just a reason. It's also, in addition to the reason, you need to have some of the prerequisites. And those are at least automated provisioning, at least decent monitoring that can handle that automated provision cycle and automated deprovisioning. You got to be able to do configuration management, although I would hope that in this particular audience, configuration management would be a foregone conclusion. You would be surprised how often it's not. So, these are really all prerequisites. You need to have a reason why. You need to have some of the infrastructure in place to really be able to take advantage of it. But then people don't know what their workload is really going to be. And there are really a plethora of clouds out there. So there's people who are running VMware with vCloud Director, or they have end users able to plug directly into their hypervisors and self-provision. Then there are folks who can't, who are doing massive scale stuff like a Zynga or a Netflix, and the end users are provisioning systems simply by creating demand on the on higher level systems. So you really need to figure out, what am I actually trying to do, and make sure that your platform of choice will actually work with that. When I am evaluating this, the way I like to think of it is in terms of stemware. So there are a couple of things that you can drink out of. You can take the very nice crystal stemware. You can get really custom designed stuff. But those workloads that you're actually going to be, what you're going to be doing with it, and what's going to be inside your cloud determines the architecture that you're going to need to build. So if your main workload is stateless web machines or stateless app servers, you probably don't really care about individual machines. If one goes away and has to be discarded, it doesn't matter. I call this the red solo cup cloud. This is where a lot of the innovation has happened. It's where Amazon really started with their innovative AWS at the time. And the folks who are doing really awesome stuff are doing the red solo cup cloud. If a machine goes away, throw it away. They don't care about it. They've got an entire sleeve that they can replace it with. And it's trivial to fix that. On the other side of that, we have the crystal stemware here, and you need to be evaluating what are the uses that I have for this cloud. Is it something that's completely stateless and I don't care about, or is it something that's going to be custom one-off machines that I describe as a hand-blown crystal chalice? If you're leaning towards the Crystal Chalice, you're trying to run your ERP system in the cloud. That's a completely different type of problem to solve. So understanding what your workload is and what the architecture of your underlying cloud platform as well as the application are going to dictate a lot of your choices. I'd also caution that the closer you get to the high-end side of the Crystal, the less likely it is that you really need a cloud. If they are custom one-offs, you need to make sure you're actually going to get value out of doing whatever it is in the cloud, because that gets farther and farther away from commodity, easily scalable on demand. So to explain this a little more, George Reese, and if you don't follow George Reese, you should. He's very opinionated. He's generally right, which makes his opinions a little more painful to deal with sometimes, but he's a very intelligent guy. He's the CEO in Stratus. The thing that I think makes George interesting is that he sees this all the time with their customers, and he interacts with virtually every public and private cloud out there. So he's talking about two different vendors here in these two tweets. The first is vCloud Director from VMware, and VMware realizes that their stakehold is in the enterprise. That's where they get all of their money. And so they have essentially pushed virtualization a little further down the cloud path and trying to make that traditional data center more cloud friendly, which is a perfectly valid solution. But at the same time, you have people who are more pure in their cloud approach and want disposable instances like AWS. AWS is taking the stance that this is a place where you should innovate, and not just innovate with your cloud platform, but with everything else. VCD and AWS, in my opinion, are at pretty opposite ends of the infrastructure as a service spectrum. And I see this, this is a more difficult problem to deal with because we haven't typically seen, we've had infrastructure around, we've had automated provisioning, so in many ways we've had things that have components of cloud computing in them. You don't tend to have the same problem in platform as a service. All of that generally is another iteration of innovation there. But when we start looking at workloads, if we look at workloads, it's great. I think that informs a lot of our choices, but we typically, when we're going through this entire cloud platform solution and working on building out a cloud, we get focused on the tools. And sysadmins are incredibly bad about this. We become almost religious about our tools. Even look at us today. We are at a conference for multiple days, focused on what is essentially a single tool, and it's a tool that I love. I've used it for different employers, so I'm almost a Puppet fanboy. But at the same time, it can be unhealthy. That unhealthy fascination can be really problematic. I've seen this time and time again, but I recently saw a very, very large technology company who had a legitimate need for a cloud platform. They had evaluated their workload, but very early in that evaluation, they had become married to a single platform. They actually, it was an open source platform, so they put developers on it. And they spent almost a year trying to use that platform of choice to bring up their cloud, and were not able to pass all of their user acceptance testing and all of the functional tests. When they finally threw up their hands and tried a different cloud platform, they actually deployed CloudStack. They were into production within a month. They passed user acceptance testing in 3 weeks, and it had been their undue fascination with that one tool that essentially hung up their project for almost a year. think about what a year of lost, the opportunity cost of a year was for them. And I'm not saying that there was anything inherently wrong with their tool. It just happened to be a very poor fit for their application. And so while we would love to keep our tools treasured, and I wouldn't dare take a chisel out of this set, keep in mind that these are tools and they need to actually achieve the purpose. People get quickly married to the idea of their tools becoming religious relics or artifacts. So how do you figure out which way to go? I wish that I could tell you that Apache CloudStack will solve all of your problems. I personally think that is the best, but I know that I'm biased and I won't foist that upon you. I think it's worth a look if you're looking at infrastructure as a service from a private cloud perspective. But I would start out with saying define success. Just like with test-driven development, you need to start out by defining what success looks like, and at what point you'll be able to declare victory, and that helps a lot. Then, unfortunately, there's no easy path there. You really have to try them all. You do yourself a disservice if you don't. There are things that each one of the platforms, be they open source or commercial, bring to the table, and evaluate which one gets you to success. And then don't forget that you also have you're responsible to keep that going long term. You're responsible to be able to handle upgrades and outages and to be able to keep that running. It goes far past installation, and that is really the unforgotten, that is really the forgotten step in all of this. Is it's great when you install it, it's great when it's up and running. How do you handle that next upgrade? It's unfortunately, cloud computing touches so many different pieces of the puzzle that this is really, I can't emphasize enough how big a deal this maintenance and upgrade cycle is, because your cloud platform is going to touch your hypervisors, it's going to touch your network, it's going to touch your storage, it's going to touch configuration management will be touching it. Your provisioning system will be touching it. Your monitoring system will be touching it. And every piece of that changes makes your life a little more miserable. So once you get your cloud up, you think that you're done, you've achieved wonderful things, life will be glorious. And there's a problem with, quite honestly, with lock-in. We are still incredibly nascent in cloud development. If you look at AWS, it's 6 years old, just over 6 years old now. AWS came out in 2006, in September of 2006. So think about where some of the competing products were at 6 years in their life cycle. Linux at 6 years old. Certainly wasn't ready to take over all the commercial Unices. It is now, and it is the de facto Unix for people to use. I think that we're iterating faster, but I do not think that we've necessarily reached perfect maturity. And so in that sense, watch out for lock-in. If I were going and doing it from scratch, I would be happy to adopt a cloud platform. I would be scared to marry myself to that platform, and so I would be looking at abstraction layers. Specifically, I would be looking at making sure that the tools that I'm using for things like setting metadata, resetting passwords, resetting SSH keys on the box are something that I can use in multiple places. I would make one of the litmus tests for success being able to take something that I'm running privately and move it to a public cloud and because it is very rare that you will use only a single provider, even if that provider is yourself, unless you have some incredible constraints on where you can house and move data. So if you can't make that move back and forth between public and private, there's a problem, and that needs to be something that you take into account. I personally would be using abstraction libraries, so things like JClouds, libcloud, fog, Dasein Cloud. Trying to think, there's a couple more. Delta Cloud from Red Hat. Those are all abstraction libraries that will allow you to essentially write code once to interact with those cloud APIs. And because you're interacting with the abstraction layer, you can rely on the abstraction layer to keep up to date. So you are impacted less by API changes, and also to make that a lot more portable. So deploying a virtual machine on EC2 is the same if you're using that abstraction library as it is if you're doing that with a local CloudStack instance, or if you're using Rackspace's public cloud or HP's public cloud. They essentially, you have that abstraction library acting as a broker, so they're speaking a common language. And to go one step further there, I would also say watch what features you're using. You would have to have a really compelling use case, or you should have a really compelling use case, if you're going to do something that is that only a single provider will provide you. So if you're using something that is completely specific and there's no identical functionality anywhere other than AWS, your solution is effectively locked into AWS. Even if you're using an abstraction library to do it all, you need to make sure that that the business case is actually compelling enough for the business case is such that that lock-in is acceptable for whatever term it's going to take for someone else to come up with it. And I think if you look, there's probably about a 3-year lag, it seems like, just looking over the history of things between folks like Amazon introducing a feature and someone else coming to replicate it. So be careful when you're saying, oh, I can do this really cool thing. Tying that to a provider is dangerous and will lock you in far more than an API will. So a lot of people ask why I'm so pessimistic, why I'm so curmudgeonly, especially when I work on a cloud project and I still have a cloud.com email address and a couple of other cloud-based email addresses. Shouldn't I be enthusiastic and excited? The entire idea of being on call for some of the disasters that I see people implementing does scare me. And I also know that so many of these projects are complete failures. We hear all the time about the Operation Rockstars at places like Zynga and Netflix and Etsy, and they inspire us to do great and wonderful things. But so much of that is driven by culture that even having perfect technical tools to execute with doesn't mean that we will execute well. And it goes wrong so incredibly awfully and often. So be careful when you're jumping out into. Oh, you can't see the bottom text, which is wonderful. I will try and remove this for a moment. This says every dark cloud has a silver lining, and that lightning kills hundreds of people who go looking for it every year. So, running after the cloud can be a wonderful experience, both personally, and it can be a wonderful experience for the business. It can also be quite disastrous. So take care, because what you really want to do is not end up with this, but you want to end up with a cloud that will give you unicorns and ponies. That's really the goal, right? Nobody is trying to get into to cloud computing to get burned. So I'm curious, I really like hearing disaster stories. Anyone want to share a disaster story this afternoon? And if you do, just shout out because I'm blinded by the projector. No one has a disaster story. Can I recount one, Jason?
Absolutely.
Okay. So Jason in the back is a rock star who deployed an awesome cloud. Unfortunately, I can't tell for who. You should go check out some of his slide decks that he's got up at geek.jasonhancock.com, I think. His blog posts are worth your time reading, particularly around interacting with clouds and using Puppet to do so, and do so at scale for on-demand workloads. Jason went and deployed this incredible cloud. I think the figure that we heard was that you came up with, it took 1/6 the time, and I don't remember what the dollar saving in licensing fees was for some of your transcoding stuff. But 1/6 the time to handle some batch processing tasks. Did that completely with the cloud. The cost was essentially licensing costs for hypervisors and the time that he sank into it plus the hardware. Incredible. It was an incredible deployment. It even had folks that wrote the cloud software being amazed and coming down to see some of the magical things. And in the end, there wasn't the political will to get it executed. And so I will emphasize that culture is a big issue here. You can have everything go right. And I don't know that he had everything go right, but he certainly did a better job than most from a technical perspective. And in the end, it still was something that didn't get adopted and did not end up benefiting the business to the same degree as it possibly could have. Ironically, another division at his employer implemented another CloudStack cloud and is doing awesome things with it. So maybe things will catch up at some point in the future. I apologize for being so negative. I hope none of you are more depressed now. I have not heard any weeping. I have had talks in the past where apparently I caused someone to cry. That is not the case here. I hope if it is, I apologize. Again, feel free to reach out to me, even if it's to berate me for having such a depressing presentation. If you want to talk, I'm happy to talk. Maybe we can turn lights back on and see. Anyone have questions? Yes.
Relatively new, but do you see that there tends to be a theme of what are typically useful uses of the cloud?
Yeah,
like your talk about, your fancy glass or what are the typical common shapes of those red plastic cups that you see?
So for the solo cups, and the pots on Pivot Key for making red solo cup play in my mind. The test dev environments are big, especially for the development side of the house. When a developer can provision an entire environment all on their own without having to ask anyone, it's an incredible productivity win. Batch jobs, so if you're doing HPC or HTC type workloads, that is a huge win because you can have completely different workloads being run on completely different types of instances, and you can spin those up and down dynamically. So anything that's really batch oriented, web scale companies who have web workloads, they're already architecting them for that type of thing anyway. That's a huge win. Everything else is really esoteric at the moment. You've got a specific type of thing that, so NVIDIA is working on a cloud that allows you to take advantage of their GPUs. So you can have also stuff like that, but that's really esoteric, and those are really corner cases. The big ones are You have the web scale stuff for companies that are doing things like Netflix. That's really awesome. The other side is you have test dev, and in between is still kind of a barren area. Anyone else want to ask questions? So I think I've got like 2 minutes left before I'm supposed to cut you guys out. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me.